few things I'm thinking about. One of them is this this idea of picking your battles or kind of narrowing down the scope of options and just saying,
Mm,
okay, this is what works. This is what we're gonna do. We're not going to put 10 locks on the door, in the security metaphor.
hmm
We're going to put
hmm
two good ones, and this is why we're going to pick these two. And we're going to give them a solid try. We're not going to like pay for half the locks. We're gonna buy
Right.
two
Yeah.
full locks and
Yep.
try them properly, right?
Yeah.
But like I think of this as like there's so many times when it's just there's just too many options, and it's hard to
Yeah.
commit and pick like a few good ones.
Mm.
Um, yeah, what do you think about this? Is this something you've experienced?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think there is always, especially for ambitious people or people with the beloved tech sector entrepreneurial mindset, as it were. There's always this temptation to just like go everywhere and fix everything, especially in tech where like most things are traditionally speaking on fire all at the same time. You want to put all those fires out at once. And so, yeah, I mean, I think constantly about um, prioritization and what we will do, what we won't do, and those things which we'll do like a little bit, but not all the way.
Yeah, I guess having like buckets like that and saying like we're
Mm.
not gonna do this. What is the there's like some prioritization methodology, I'm forgetting the name of it. It's like must have,
Uh,
nice to have, will not
yeah,
have.
there's a lot, and I like to pair that methodology or ones like it with the fast, cheap, good rule. And
Low
you
hanging
pick
fruit.
two. That's right. You pick your two.
Oh, I see. Oh,
Um,
yeah, 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 absolutely.
yeah, you can have it fast, you can have it cheap, or you can have it good. You can't have all three. You got to pick
Right,
two.
right, right, right.
Is usually true. So I kind of pair up those methodologies and see, okay, well, what can we do well? What can we do cheaply? What can we do quickly? I think this especially comes into play. I haven't had a conversation about this recently, but I used to have like constant conversations with product and engineering teams I'd work alongside where, someone would suggest that we build some convoluted internal tool to, accomplish X goal. And then, I'd go find a reasonably affordable piece of software that already existed. And the question was always like, well, why would we build this when it already exists, And so, but I think that's a valid question to ask too. Like, when do you build it yourself? When do you make the purchase?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's all these checks and balances. And again, I think the temptation, that's another iteration of that temptation to just like do everything is like, yeah, we're going to build it all in-house. So it's perfectly suited to our needs. And again, to use a security metaphor, I don't know if you've ever built a lock before. I certainly haven't, but I don't think I trust myself to,
It's a
for
good point.
example.
I mean, yeah, and there's a lot of parallels too. I mean, it's the classic one I think of is like, okay, if I have a cold, like, yeah, I can go to the drugstore and buy myself some medicine. But if my arm is broken, I'm not gonna
Right.
just like try to figure it out myself.
Who's walking off,
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. Like there's a point where you're like, all right, professional that I can trust, like do this for
that's
me,
right.
right?
That's right. Yeah. Well,
Um,
and then there's the in-betweens, like, there are various support tools I can think of where, yeah, you buy it, but in the end you wind up building it yourself because the amount of customization you have to make is, you may as well have just built it yourself.
that's a big one, and I think this is another theme here that I've been thinking about and talking to people about is like the disconnect between the sales promise and the service you get, like the follow through from the
Mm.
company. It's like it's all marketing hype and it's all sales, and then you like, all right, good luck. you know,
Right, right.
like after you sign the contract, they're like, yeah, all right, talk to you in a year. Tell us how it's
hmm
going, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I find that so interesting because I find that I'm unhappy in two contexts. The first is the one you just mentioned where there's this, potentially incredibly complex thing that you've bought, whatever it is. Um, and yeah, the sales team is just like, okay, bye. Thanks for your money. We'll see you never. Um, and then the other scenario is one in which there's this gargantuanly complex thing that you've bought, and then the amount of you're basically committing to a 6 month like relationship with some onboarding manager somewhere where you're like, texting late at night, just like, hey, what are we gonna do tomorrow? Like, uh, and I don't like that either.
Mm,
So many and companies build entire brands around those kinds of experiences where um, you have to be best friends with your
mm,
onboarding manager
mm,
or your setup consultant for 6 months just to make a piece of software work.
mm.
And that really bums me out too. I don't I don't want that. Um, you know, I, I think we're probably still dealing with something of an epidemic of loneliness in in society broadly, but like I don't think that's the answer. It's like
Sure. Yeah.
incredibly long onboarding cycles. So, there's this happy medium there too of, you know, if your onboarding cycle has to last 3 to 6 months, then your experience is probably just too complicated and you have some tech debt that you need to deal with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's probably some there's some kind of gap, right? Like I could
Mm,
imagine you have like a fully self-serve, easy, smooth, quick onboarding, like good
yeah.
documentation, like not too complex. You just figure it out yourself in short order and boom, you're getting results. And then you have the
Hmm.
other end, which is like, massive, insane enterprise software that's
Hmm.
like not designed to have an easy onboarding, and it's designed to
Mm.
be this massive contract with a whole bunch of service and like a customer success manager that texts you at midnight and like, and
Right, right.
like all of that. And then like when you're buying that, you should have your eyes open, and obviously it's like, certain kinds of large businesses are going to be buying that sort of software, and then they're
Mm.
like they commit to it properly, and they have like a team internally that's like ready to
Yeah,
expedite the integrations and like ready to get it
right.
going. It's not just like dropped on support and like, you guys could kind of like, trickle a little trickle here, a little trickle there, and like figure it out, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think the specter of AI tools looms heavily over this conversation too.
We made it
I,
eight
I'm
minutes
all.
without talking about
I mean,
AI.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's about as long as any of us are making it right now.
Yeah, I'd say. Yeah.
Um,
Okay, go ahead.
but I mean, uh, they're great. But I think a lot of the talk about the I don't really see anybody talking about the speed of implementation
Mm,
as much as publicly as much as internal conversations are had
right,
about that,
right.
right? Because, you know, these things take time. They certainly weren't built overnight. So
Yeah.
it's only natural that there's some amount of time and I think half of that discussion is just like identifying funnels. Once you've done that, a lot of it does kind of take care of itself.
Mm.
But the amount of time you have to discuss building decent funnels for these information systems is it's no joke.
Yeah, I think the AI tools obviously are capable of, you know, kind of magical things.
Hmm.
Um, you know, but I think that um the requirements for getting good results from them are the
Mm,
same as any software, but just magnified. It just
that's right.
takes more integration. It takes more knowledge management. It
Yeah.
takes just more of everything to get it set up right.
Yeah.
And I think people have this image that AI is so easy to start using because of their
Hmm.
personal experience. Maybe, I mean, I'm not sure exactly why, but that's like one hunch, is that it's very easy to try ChatGPT and be like, ooh, it said something interesting to me.
Hmm.
Now when I'm going to go and buy this AI software for my business, it's going to be just as easy to use, right? Like, that's my
Right.
hunch, is it like
Yeah.
in the somewhere in people's mind, like that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actually
Yeah.
it's just harder than ever. I mean, the
Well,
results are
and
great, but
as
yeah.
especially, and to maybe ground us in a more broadly applicable lens of conversation, I think a lot of that is actually just carryover from the age-old tradition of having strong opinions um, about someone else's work and how it should be done, while simultaneously having about zero context of how that work works and what it actually is, right? It's support telling engineering what to do without context. It's engineering telling product what to do without context. It's sales telling support what to do without context. Um, and that too is only amplified and magnified with AI tools, because it's, every support leader I've talked to who has had um, a negative opinion of those tools, has a lot of those conversations have been around, like, so and so on such and such team wants us to implement AI in this way, and I'm frustrated because that's not how this works. And the misunderstanding isn't about AI tools or how they work, or um, anything like that. The misunderstanding is just about what it is that these departments do and how they work. So I think that it grounds me back to a more universal conversation of like how to collaborate well, how to work cross-functionally well, how to build relationships cross-functionally, such that people, have a mutual understanding and respect for the work that's being done cross-functionally.
Yeah, I think that there's a shift happening, and I think that you know, like you said, those challenges predated AI, but
Yep.
I think it exacerbates those challenges, or highlights the importance of solving them.
Hmm.
For me, it's that cross-functional piece, because all these AI tools are, somewhat technical in nature, and
Hmm.
then technical times whatever department, right? So if you have like a marketing tool, or a support tool, or a sales tool, or whatever it is, it's
Yep.
technical times whatever else. And
Yeah.
then, you probably are going to overlap a little bit as well. So there might be like three departments or more, plus management. So it really starts to, like, these AI tools, again, it's like the deeper you integrate it, the more powerful it is, but the more coordination you need, right?
Hmm.
The the harder it gets to set up. So
Well, and it's funny too, because I see, if you ask me, I think the lot of the future, or my hope anyway, is that the future of those tools is at least somewhat related to consolidation. Um, because one of the greatest gifts that anyone can give me on any team that I'm joining as a support leader is if they have already done the work of integrating support systems data into the overall uh, data management and data visualization and data analysis tools that the rest of the org is using, right? If I'm jumping into a team and I've already got support data and customer interaction data in a data warehouse, along with, like, sales information and like marketing metrics and product usage data, like, that's the dream. And I think the same is probably going to be true for any AI tools that you're using. Like, at the very least, I think it's going to be critical for all these AI tools to, like, integrate with those data systems in the same way, because right now I kind of see scenarios playing out where the support team's got their AI tool and the marketing team's got theirs and the sales team has theirs and they're not really talking to each other. So I don't know that we all need like one-stop shop solutions or anything like that. I do think like bespoke and purpose-built tools make sense, but the doing the back end work to make sure that those tools can all use the same data sets and have the same level of access to cross-functional information is going to be like mission critical.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a few things I wanted to branch off from that. I think one is this idea of just sort of company-wide visibility. Um,
Mm,
there's different levels of openness around data in different organizations, not from a
mhm.
technical limitation point of view, but just culturally,
Yeah,
right? And some teams are like, here's our profit and loss, here's all of our numbers. You know,
yeah.
maybe maybe a really extreme organization would even like put the salaries out there, right? I think that's a pretty
Hmm.
rare one, but there's certain levels definitely of like, if you're at the CEO level, you can kind of look into and see everything, right? And then like the next tier and then the next tier. And there's always going to be some things that are gated or kind of restricted access.
Sure.
But um ideally it's just the minimum possible. And then culturally the company just has a value that says, look, we're just going to make everything open so everybody can see what's really going on. And then we're making this bet that that's gonna help collaboration. It's gonna help everybody understand their place a little bit better. So I think the culture part is a big one of that, and like different organizations have a very different view about that. I've
Yeah.
learned to my surprise. I mean, I guess I've been spoiled, but I mean, I was talking to somebody recently who was saying that the support team didn't have access to almost any data, and it was like they asked for it and they were denied. It was like, we want to know what the impact of this is, and the management was like, no, you don't get to see that.
Oh,
So
okay.
I mean, maybe that's a rare case. I don't know. This might have been
I mean, I would
you know
hope,
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it's. I feel like I've experienced variations on a theme of that, but never something I think quite that extreme.
So there's the one part is just the culture thread, right? Of like data
Yeah,
visibility. Is it a cultural value of the company to make things open and accessible, right? And there's different levels of that. Hopefully, you're not in an extremely bad case. People out there, they're going to
yeah,
be listening to this, but
yeah.
um,
If you are, blink twice. If you are, we'll come find
send
you.
help, right? Um, but I think the other thread I get from this is the historical kind of the inertia of support
Hmm.
being in what I'm going to call a data ghetto, which is that kind of marginalized and not connected to the bigger
Hmm.
picture, kind
Hmm.
of whether it's through neglect or discrimination of a sort towards support. I think there's this inertia, or this kind of um, some kind of negative legacy of like looking at support only as a cost, only
Hmm.
as low priority, only as like this little miscellaneous thing that our business does, as opposed to something that's central and that is connected to not only to cost but also to revenue. And so
Yeah.
like the idea of like the data ghetto. And then of course I want to talk about like how do you escape, how do you get out of the ghetto, right? um,
Yeah.
so you got to connect back to the bigger picture of the business, right? You got to show the impact and become part of the bigger conversation, right?
Yeah, I think this is great because I feel like we finally arrived at hot take time.
Yes.
And I think my hot take on all of that, or at least the hottest one I can measure, is um, you've talked about different ways to look at, why that is. the best assessment that I can gather from both personal experience and speaking with other CX leaders over the years, the past decade, um, is what I would label a mutual and perhaps mutually assured ignorance.
Mm.
Um, so like I'm perfectly willing to take some of that blame, maybe not at a personal level, but at a professional, organizational level. We're as much to blame as anybody else. It's funny, I remember giving a talk at a conference 8 years ago. And it was one of the best talks I've ever given and one of the worst titles I've ever had, because the title of the talk was Translation for Support Professionals. I wanted to call it transliteration, but the conference folks were like, nobody's going to understand. Nobody knows what that is. Like, no one's going to come to your talk. So I had a bunch of people showing up thinking that I was going to talk about, translating English support to Spanish and whatever, but that's not, there was a subtitle. The whole talk was what we're talking about here, which is connecting your support inputs and outputs, your events and outcomes, um, translating the value of those inputs and outputs into language that will make sense to other teams. So, in brief, you don't go to your VP of growth and say, hey, we reduced our time to first response this month, and it resulted in, a 20% higher average CSAT score, because you've essentially said nothing in that conversation to that person. But if
Yep.
you can say, hey, and this resulted in X amount of growth or X amount of retention or whatever, um, then you're having a conversation. Likewise, with product teams, you're talking all about friction and adoption and usage. With engineering teams, you're talking about friction, but usually friction for them. How do we reduce engineering time and cost? And
Hmm. Hmm.
engineers, I think, I find are admirably uh, lazy. It's like a good kind of laziness that
Spend an hour
reduces friction
automating
in.
something that would take you 10 minutes to do by hand.
That's right. But then you never have to do it again, you know?
Right, right,
So
right.
win-win.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think, a lot of it just comes from a presumption on the part of both senior leaders and customer support professionals that we all have the same values. We all value the same things, and it's just not true. Um, and so if you don't do the work of translating those value statements on your side into, excuse me, things that will make sense on the other person's side, you're not you're not going to work well together. You're not going to get out of the data ghetto, because no one is going to agree with you that it's important for support to see sales data. So if I
Right,
don't go to that
right.
salesperson, that VP of growth, and say, hey, I'm tired of measuring CSAT for CSAT's sake because it doesn't make any sense. I would like to see if there's any correlation whatsoever between our high CSAT scores and like actual retention data, actual expansion data, actual growth. And if it isn't, I just don't want to measure that anymore. I want to measure something that does influence that number. That person's going to get on board. That person's going to say like, oh yeah, okay, great. What do you want to see? Um, Likewise, I was having a conversation just yesterday with someone where we were talking about something similar, and they said, "Well, what do you do to get people interested in that? Do you show up to a meeting with your product and engineering folks and say like, "Hey, what data do you want to see?" And I think the answer is, inevitably yes, but that can't be your first step in that conversation. Your first step has to be, you've got to present the exciting data at the front end, or at least information that you feel you can get them moderately excited about, because everybody needs that aha moment. Um, I think that's the other part of this conversation, is that there's the presumption, um, by no fault of support leaders. I don't think that they're complicit in this, but there is the presumption that like support data is not valuable. Um, And so one of your first steps is to there's a little quid pro quo, right, that has to happen. Like you have to give good data to get good data. Um, and so you have to show up to the table with something compelling and exciting that makes product leaders, engineering leaders, sales leaders, even marketing go like, oh wow, I didn't know that. You can see that? You have that information? Um, and then you ask them, yeah, what else do you want to see? And you go and you research that. And then
Yeah.
by doing that, you can make the exchange so like, hey, since I'm giving you this information, what's going on in Hotjar? Can I see that? What's going on in Datadog or whatever, you know?
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
Yeah, I think coming to the conversation with some data
mm,
already prepared is so
yep,
important, right? Always, I've learned this lesson the hard way because
yep,
I'm an ideas person, by nature, and I would love to come and share some ideas with everybody, inside my company, people who don't
hmm
want to listen to me, people who are totally tired of hearing my random ideas, right? And I've learned
yeah,
that um, in my personal life as well. It's so much better to come with like, here is a mock-up.
hmm
Here is a screenshot of a dashboard. Here
yep,
is like, a spreadsheet that I prepared. Like do the preparation step,
hmm
even if it's not exactly even if it's not exactly what that person's looking for, just show that you've like done something instead of just like having a thought, right?
yep,
um, and it's always so much more effective to just
hmm
start a conversation like that, right? And to bring it back to what you were saying, I think if you want to have some marketing data to inform something you're doing in support, right? Go and use ChatGPT, use whatever it is, use Google, but just look for some of the metrics that marketing cares about,
hmm
and then be like, all right, how can support data connect to those metrics? Like one of the good examples I think is VOC data is actually great for SEO.
yes,
So like you can say, here's a bunch of keywords that are trending in our support center. Maybe you should create SEO, like keyword optimized for these things people are looking for, right?
yeah,
Um, like that's one case, but I think just you know, speaking the language of the department, whether it's the terminology or it's the kind of the data language, so to speak, right? Like there's certain KPIs, there's certain metrics that it just keeps coming up again and again in sales, or keeps coming up again and again in marketing. And if you use those words, there it's like we speak the same language. Like
yes,
you're no longer speaking, Esperanto or something. Like you're now we're both speaking English. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
right, right, right. Yeah, and to bring it back to something you were saying too, I think that this is all an output of that company culture. And I think that culture of openness, the companies that I've contributed to that have had that open culture, that open dialogue, and have done it the best, have a foundational belief that I think differentiates them and that propels that sort of collaborative, open, transparent behavior and information sharing. And that belief is that we're all family. Just kidding. It's not that. That's horrible. If you hear that, run away. Again, blink twice. No, the belief is um, that we have one goal as an organization, as a company,
Right.
and that goal is inevitably at the end of the day to make money or to, in whatever form that takes, right? We can say like it's to get to a great exit or it's to, serve the shareholders. Like all that it means is like the goal of the company is to make money. I think that shouldn't be controversial to have said. Um, and I think that companies that recognize that that is the goal of every single person, like that there are no departments, there are no jobs, there are no people who are detached from that goal, then very naturally say, well, yeah, if we all have the same goal, like I'm a big believer in knowledge limiting for efficiency's sake, um, but not as like a rule. If somebody's curious about something, like let them be curious, let them go
Right.
figure something out, let them open that door.
Right.
Um, so I believe in doors, but I believe in glass doors, right?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, it makes sense. I
so
mean, there is just a point where it's just overload. Um,
yeah.
I think what you're saying about ultimately, obviously um, the goal of the business is to make money, and I think one of the most powerful things that people can do in support is to
Mm,
connect to profit and loss, connect to the P&L
100%.
statement.
100%.
And
Yes.
there's a few ways that I have learned that you can do that from support. So the one of the best ones is retention,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
yes, you might have to do a little quid pro quo data trade. You might have to beg for an integration to happen. But if you can say, look, customer ID, user ID 123, they came into the support channel, they came into our funnel somewhere, they went through this step and this step, and then they went and did not cancel,
Mm-hmm.
or they did go and cancel. Okay, and we had this percent of people coming through and canceling last month, and now it's down 10% or whatever,
Yep.
right? That cancel flow, it's ultimately people visiting a web page in most businesses today,
Yeah.
right? And if you can just track, like, user ID 123 came to support and then visited the cancel page, or did not visit the cancel page, boom, like you've
Yep.
connected to one of the most important levers of business, which is retention, which is ultimately revenue,
Right.
right?
Right.
And now you're in the big boy conversation, right?
Right. Right. Well, and sometimes you have to get crafty with those measurements too, because there is uh, an extent to which support like lives in negative world, right?
Right, right, the upside down.
Contacting the support team is not automatically a positive.
Right,
And
right,
so you do have to learn to like measure the negatives as positives as well, right? And that's tricky. It's really hard to do. It's why so many support professionals are not great at this still, um, because it's it's hard for somebody to wrap their head around like how do we measure how many tickets we don't get? Right? It's hard. Um, I think another great
yeah,
way to do it too, though, is if you can. That said, the fact that we live in, negative world aside, if you can also find a way to measure, expansion, not just retention, but expansion. Um, I mean, I would challenge everybody like go to your sales leaders and say when you're like talk to your SDRs when you're having conversations with customers and there are certain like keywords or phrases or things that are like blinking lights for you that say, oh, I should recommend them this product or this add-on or this, whatever. What go and learn what those are. And then tell your support team because they can be doing that too. And the minute that you can, by no means am I saying like every support team should do sales. Ugh, no, don't do that. But I think that every support team should be empowered with the information to spot the same sort of assistive, um, uh, trusted advisor conversations that an SDR can have or an account manager can have with the customer. Like we're great at those. So why shouldn't we be doing them? Why shouldn't we be saying like, hey, we're fixing this problem, but I'm also noticing that XYZ, right? And did you know we have this thing that does that? Um, that doesn't feel gross to me. And it's also like that will explode the heads of your various growth leaders if you're able to do that, because no one knows. that we can do that, um, except for us.
That's a great point. And I'm getting inspired listening to you. I think there's a lot to learn from sales. I think there's a lot to learn from marketing as well, and how marketing and sales kind of work together. I mean, because
Yes.
that's the classic. If you look at the financial statements of a business, it's S&M are on the same line, right? Sales and marketing are kind of like paired
Yep.
as this one function, or
Yeah.
or one line item on the statement. But in sales, there's the idea of a marketing qualified lead,
Hmm.
right? And I don't know if everybody's familiar with this term, but basically, um, through some means, this lead has come through marketing to sales, and marketing says, we think this is valid, right? This is not just a
Hmm.
random email address. This is like somebody who's actually a reasonable chance of becoming a customer. We
Yep.
validated it by doing something, right? What about the idea of like a support qualified upsell?
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and the
Just to
crazy,
put a
yeah.
label on what is your idea, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, well, and it's not even my idea, right? Like this is stuff that that folks at Help Scout, for example, they had a whole playbook 5 or 6 years ago about support-driven growth. Um, and the playbook before that that left out the support piece for many organizations was like most of us have heard of, well, I don't know about most, but a lot of us have heard of product-led growth
right,
as a methodology, right? You don't have maybe a traditional sales team. It's land and expand. You've got a freemium model that's really great, and then eventually people click that buy button. Spotify's all over this, for example, right?
yep,
Nobody's cold calling. No one from unless something has changed that I don't know about. Nobody from Spotify is like cold calling people and being
right,
like, "Hey, what if you never had to pay for music again?" But uh, that model, in my opinion, works best when you have a customer support team that is also enabled and empowered and educated to create growth, to qualify leads, we did that a number of companies ago. We did that exact thing. I heard that we were, um, came down the ladder that we were going to pivot to a product-led growth model. Um, And my immediate response was to grab the executive team and deliver a presentation and say, "Hey, I think that's a great idea. Also, let's do a support-driven growth model. Let's do both because they fit incredibly well together. And I think we're going to probably do twice what we would do with just a product-led growth model if we pair it with support-driven growth." And that's exactly what we did. And in many ways, our frontline support agents became, uh, you know, SDR lights because they were coming in, they were solving customer problems, but they were also um, solving them for freemium customers and saying like, hey, what's doing all this lead qualification, um, and they were doing it in this beautiful way that like wasn't gross and wasn't creepy and wasn't aggressive. It was just helpful. In the sales world, they call this consultative selling,
right,
where you're not being aggressive. You're not saying like, well, I really think you need this, and if you don't, you want to be left out. Everybody else is doing it. You're not doing, weird peer pressurey things. You're just
zero
saying like,
pressure, yep,
and sometimes you're saying, look, I love that you're interested. I don't think this will be helpful for you, um, which has been happening for years at really incredible professional sales orgs. So like that too is not foreign to that world. But yeah, I think there's the only the only skill set I would argue that really incredible salespeople have and really incredible support people don't is um, is that ability to push. And in some sales organizations and for some products, you do need that. Um, you know, uh, as much as I don't like to do it, I value that other people can and do because it is helpful. Sometimes that's just how the negotiation works. But for others, that's just not what your sales cycle looks like. And so, if that's the differentiator, then support has all the other skills, all the same other skills, and sometimes
Right.
better
Right.
suited skills to consultative selling than some sales professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're spot on, and I think that like in my mind again, I'm thinking of like really practical steps people can take to actually like to get this going, right? And I
Mm.
think if you're B2B or you're
Hmm.
selling something that's very expensive B2C, then
Hmm.
then that it's possible and you have this whole sales model and everything you're saying applies, right? And I
Yeah.
think in
Yeah.
that case, you could set up very simply like a tracking link to a calendar page, right? Like a booking
Hmm.
link for a sales rep, or if you have like
Yes.
there's sometimes like routing systems, so there's like one page and it'll give you whoever's available or whatever, but just have
Mm.
that link available for the support team to use in conversation and be like, okay, I've identified, ABC. These are my like my flags that like, green flag, green flag, green flag. We can help this person by selling them something. Um,
Yeah.
Now here's a tracking link.
Yeah.
Now that feeds back to, and support is the hero, right? For like
That's right.
identifying an opportunity for the business to make money, right?
Yeah.
And setting up a
Yeah.
tracking link is like dead simple. I mean,
Oh
maybe
yeah.
tying it in perfectly and integrating, like maybe there's a little more involved, but you could like get going with like a tracking link. There's free tools, like it's not hard to do that. And then if you have to like do a little spreadsheet shuffling or whatever to just, you know, just to get it started without any resources, like you can do that like today.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, if you have absolutely no resources to do it, you can just literally write down customer IDs and say like,
Sure.
hey, on this
Yeah.
day we helped this customer
Yeah.
in this ticket,
Yeah.
and then send them off to sales.
Yeah.
Um,
If you're in
yeah,
the B2C world, it's potentially even easier. I
yeah,
gave the example before of like, you have user ID 123 comes through support, goes to the cancel page. You could also have user 123 come through and go to the checkout page,
yeah,
right? Um, and if
yep.
if you can connect the systems, again, it might be depending on how all the data is, flowing in your organization. That might be a lot to ask, but you can make a case pretty simply and say, look, we can show where revenue is coming from. Now it's a lever we can pull to increase revenue. Like we should do this, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so whether that's easy to set up or hard to set up might depend on your company, but those are some examples where you can take support out of the I said data ghetto, right? But like you can kind of
Hmm.
you can get into the bigger conversation and you can really show concretely the value, right? Not just
Yeah, yeah.
we're a cost, but like here's the revenue contribution.
And once you've done that and you're tracking properly support-driven revenue, support qualified leads, I like that. I'm going to use that. Um, then you can say, okay, great. Now let's set up the team bonus plan for all of these
Right.
sales. And I do
Yeah.
recommend, like, I recommend doing that, doing it early. Um, And I also recommend pretty strongly making it a team-based bonus.
Mm,
Individual-based bonuses are great for salespeople. Team-based bonuses are great for support teams because that's
right.
just, in my experience, more how they're oriented. But I mean, it brings us back to our prior point, right? If the overarching goal of every single company is to make money, it's the overarching goal of every person who goes to
Yep.
work as well.
Yep.
And so that's a strong motivator, a strong and also a strong signal um, to other departments that like, yeah, not only is this something that we can do, but it's something we're rewarded for and something that nothing nothing screams utility uh, like a company putting money towards something.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I realized we're a little bit over on our scheduled time here. Are you good to keep going a little bit more?
Yeah, I am if you are.
Okay, let's keep going. I'm having a great time.
Same.
One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm kind of bouncing back to one of the first topics we mentioned was like
Mm,
the the case where support is begging for engineering time. And what do you
mm-hmm,
do? Um, One of the things that I see as a trend, and I'm not the only one to notice this, but there's an increase in support operations roles, and I
mm-hmm.
think there's going to be an increase in support engineer roles as well. And so you have again, because especially in the AI era, right? It's
Hmm.
whatever business function times technology, right? And this has been true for a while, even before AI, but
Yeah.
it's even more exaggerated the importance of this now. And if you have, like, for example, the sales team, there might be a growth engineer, right? That's a job
Hmm.
title. And they
Right.
work directly with the sales team and they write code and integrate things, and like that's their job
Mm.
for sales, right?
Yeah.
You might have a marketing tech engineer, a martech engineer, right? That's just like integrating all the advertising platforms and whatever, like all that stuff in the marketing world. And there's going to
Yeah.
be more and more support engineers too.
Yes.
And I think modern organizations, kind of forward-thinking organizations, are going to have that role. And I think the sooner the better. And if you're doing a big deep integration of some tool and you don't have the resources for it, I think there's hopefully you can, bend the ear of somebody and say, "Look, like support engineer, we need one."
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and the definitional, I'll tell you one of the things that bugs me, and this is totally a personality thing. Like I love a good taxonomy, a strong definition, and so one of the things that bugs me at both a personal and a professional level is that the term support engineer, um, and even probably the term like growth engineer is so the definition is so unsettled of what that role is, right? Because it's so many different things on so many different.
Oh,
Sometimes a growth engineer, for example, is just like, well, that's just somebody who engineers growth.
right, right.
So it's a marketing role, right?
Right,
You're like,
right,
oh yeah, they engineer growth by creating marketing materials, and then they release
right.
those marketing materials, and then
Actual job
growth
is
is
making
engineered, and you're like,
PDFs.
that's not what a growth engineer is.
Right.
So so I think that that's going to be one of the challenges,
Mm,
to get to the point you're talking about where we have this strong presence of engineers, of highly technical people, highly technical roles on support teams, is just getting to the point where we all agree on what the definition of a support
mm,
engineer is. There's also sort of a legacy definition, right? IT firms, for example, have been calling uh, what you and I would refer to as like support agents, or maybe technical support agents. They've been calling those folks technical support engineers for years. So there's just
mm.
this legacy definition that you're going to battle against as well
Right, right.
with certain audiences where they're like, oh yeah, I know what that is, and you're like, it's not the same. Um, so I think that's a challenge. I totally agree with you that there will be an increased need. There should be an increased need for those folks on the team. And I think that one of the ways that you can help folks understand why that role is needed is to present them with your your tech stack, right? I don't always hear support leaders talking about their support tools as like a tech stack, but they should.
Mm,
They ought to. Like Zendesk is
yeah,
part of your tech stack. Intercom's part of your tech stack. Like it's all, if it's a tool and you use it and it's a piece of technology, it's part of your tech stack. So talk about it
yeah.
that way. It helps people understand. And if you can help folks understand that like, hey, these tools take time and energy and input to run and to run well and to set up and customize and all these things. Everybody's got a Salesforce engineer. So you make a comparison there. It's like we need our version of the Salesforce engineer.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think one of the other big struggles um, that like is frustratingly persistent is also um, the automatic response to a lot of those asks, I think, is, well, we already have engineers and we've already got, some ops people, so why don't we just have those ops people do this thing? And then before you know it, you blink and you've got this sort of detached. It's kind of one of those worlds in which the worst thing that can happen to you is for you to get exactly what you wanted, because you're asking for engineering attention to support tooling and support needs, and then you finally get it, but it's from like the engineering team who you have no uh, control over, and no oversight, and so suddenly you have an engineering team building your knowledge base or something from scratch,
Yeah.
and it takes 6 weeks to change the title of an article or something like that.
Right. Right.
So so I think you have to get out ahead of that as well and say like it has to be, at least there needs to be some sort of cross-functional reporting relationship,
Right.
to
Right.
where support has control over that thing. Um, so if you're on that journey, like know that those are your two largest initial challenges to doing this and doing this well. Um, I think there's another element to this though, and as much as I hesitate to dive back into AI as a topic, because I think we all are. Um, a worthwhile conversation that I haven't seen as many people having is, so I subscribe to a bunch of newsletters, a lot of them related to support, some of them related to sales, some of them related to marketing, some of them related to engineering. And what's really interesting to me is what I have been accustomed to in prior years is like new piece of technology comes out, especially AI, and everything progresses as normal with all of my newsletters except for support, who's like wringing their hands about like, oh no, what's this going to mean for support as a career, right? There is a distinct and marked difference
Mm.
now.
Mm.
Every single one of those newsletters is now doing the support thing and going, oh no, what's going to happen to all our careers? And I
Interesting.
find that most interesting from the engineering perspective,
Mm.
for all the same reasons why, that we're talking about here. And I'm not worried about, it's rare for me to be so optimistic, but I'm actually optimistic. I don't think, AI is coming to cancel all human activity in the workplace. Um, but I do think that, to draw a parallel, before Google, most people weren't researchers.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
Google came along and made us all bad researchers. So we're bad, we're not good at it. But we can do it now,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like even yeah, just about anybody can hop on to a search engine and like find some information and like go down a rabbit hole and whatever. And we do this constantly now. Where those self same people were not, in 1987 all going to the library and poring over the bookshelves, right?
Right.
It was
Right.
not a commonplace activity.
Right.
And AI, I think, is poised to do the same. And one of the things that it's poised to do is to make anybody who wants to be a bad engineer,
Mm.
a bad developer.
Yep. I agree.
Um, or perhaps more charitably, we could use the term a passable, a developer, a hobbyist. And I think that that's going to be critical for support professionals, especially in the tech world. Um, I think there was a lot of pushback 15 years ago, 10 years ago, about support people feeling like they needed to learn to code
Mm.
because, and it was worthwhile pushback. And I think a lot of it was based on support being viewed as sort of like the foot in the door position for people who wanted to go become product managers or engineers. Um, people who couldn't make it past the junior dev interview could like make it in the support one and then wind their way up there. Um, so I absolutely still believe that support is a career and will continue to be one. But I think one of the changes is exactly what you're talking about. Not only will there be an increased call for support engineers, for devs who are housed in the support organization, but I do think it might actually be finally time for most support agents who work in tech to start dipping their toe back into code and saying like, you know what, I'm not going to learn, I'm not going to, become a full stack engineer or something like that, but I am going to learn enough to be dangerous when it comes to using an AI copilot and writing really good prompts. Um, and I think my pitch for that to most people is just imagine for a moment a world in which instead of chucking a customer problem over a big black wall to the engineering department, where someone does something mysterious and then chucks it back over to you, and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't, but there's zero visibility, very little communication, very little control over that solution for a customer. Imagine a world in which you could um, get read access, at least to the code base, throw something into an internal AI tool, look for the bug, find the bug, and then again be dangerous enough with prompts to write a script or make an edit or whatever, um, that you then send to engineering. And then engineering goes like, oh, you just saved me 3 hours. I mean, that feels like a worthwhile enterprise to me.
That is a great idea, and I think it's an even better idea. What? So let me rephrase that. It's a great idea, I think, for any kind of company which has a code base. First of all, that they're
Yes.
like is part of their business, right?
Yep.
If you just have like technical tools, but you're not a technical business, that might be a different story. But
Right.
if you're somehow involved in software or the the writing of code in some way as part of your
Hmm.
core business, then I think support obviously is going to be naturally more technical to start off, and then taking that step over the big black wall um,
Hmm.
is great. And a short personal story: I did not go to school for coding.
No.
I did not particularly excel in math class. I was never I never thought of myself as being kind of technically minded, but I've always been in a I've always been a computer user, right? I've
Hmm.
always been like PC gamer. I've always been like really into like computer and tech stuff. And during the pandemic, I was just frustrated because I had all these ideas for things that I wanted to build. I wanted to see these features. I wanted to see these apps, and like I couldn't just like bother my engineering friends enough, and they're all like doing their own stuff. And I just learned to code, and I just got over
Yeah.
it. Like I had this fear, and I just got over it, and like took
Yeah.
some free tutorials, took some online classes, figured it out, And now, I wouldn't say I'm a genius engineer, but like I can build some apps. Like I can
Yeah.
build some features. I can do some things. And I feel like that's been so valuable. And I think anybody who works on a computer, this is the most broadest group of people I can think of, but just
Hmm.
anybody who works on a computer, you owe it to yourself to learn to code a little.
Yep.
And
Yep.
obviously, with AI tools today, to your point, like if you can, kind of coax an AI coder with a creative prompting and repeated, please fix this bug, and like you can get pretty far. And if you add just like a little sprinkling of coding knowledge, you can get really far.
Yep.
Um, it's a huge unlock for your career, generally speaking. I think it's an unlock for
Mm.
life. It's just like it's so great, and I can't. How can I say? I can't overhype it enough. I can't.
Yeah.
What's the word for this? I'm at a loss
I
for words, but it's
Well,
like,
I think,
yeah,
and I think the point you're making harkens back to like another part of the conversation we were having. I think, you know, anybody who works in tech specifically owes it to themselves. Anybody who works on computers and spends a lot of time on them owes it to themselves to learn how those things work, even at a surface level.
yeah,
Totally agree. And that same thing is true for anybody who works, period. I think you owe it to yourself. A lot of people call this business acumen, uh, but you owe it to yourself to learn how companies work. You don't have to, and it's the same situation. You don't have to go out and get an MBA. I have a degree in English. Uh, so I'm right there with you in not being great at math class. Uh, but, and I don't have an MBA, but I know how a business works, and I've been gifted uh, the opportunity to work at organizations where they were really transparent with finances and
yeah,
fundraising and how all that worked, right? So I just know a lot of stuff, um, and I think that's what it is. If you are, um, there's another conversation I had a long time ago where I made the argument that the absolute best CX leaders are incredible generalists. And I think this is, two expressions of that idea. You become a business generalist, you become a technology generalist, and then that strengthens the more core competencies and expertise you have in de-escalation, in situation management, in um, customer journey building and mapping, because now you have these other additional lenses and frameworks and inputs through which to interpret the human experiences that we are creating for people with businesses and products and situations. And I think, for technical teams, you're spot on, and even for non-technical teams, maybe you're not gonna try and get yourself to a point where you're, as I said, quote unquote, like dangerous uh, with writing prompts for an AI coding assistant. But again, if you're doing your work on a computer, if it's B2C e-commerce, and it's not a technical product, and so you're unconcerned with all that kind of stuff, I think you still owe it to yourself to learn a little bit. Again, as we've been saying, like learn to speak the language so that when you need to go talk to whoever, finance ultimately, and say, hey, I need someone on my team who can be my technical person, who can be the internal IT person for my team, and customize our tools and build our things and write our scripts and, set up API integrations. Um, you can make a way better case because not only can you sound like you know what you're talking about, but you can actually know what you're talking about as well. Um, so I think even for those non-technical roles, it's worthwhile to learn a little bit in the same way that you learn about how a business is funded and what a P&L is and some light accountancy here and there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think in you know the the benefit of this is, I think, surprising, or will be surprising to people who take these kinds of steps, or who are taking these kinds of steps, because once you're part of the once you have the business acumen, once you're part of the bigger picture of the business, once you're
Yeah.
connected to the profit and loss statement, once you're connected to the technical, functioning of the product, now you're not in this, you know, um, this limited space of support anymore. You are in the business
Yeah.
overall,
Yeah.
and that feels better. I mean,
Yeah.
it's psychically rewarding. you know,
Right. Right.
it's not
Right.
only
Well,
like actually good for your career, but it just it feels better to go to work, I think.
and it's funny too because even organizations, even companies um, who know that customer service is important, who know that creating, incredible experiences for your customers, or even just even non-incredible but non-annoying experiences for your customers, like people know that value intrinsically, they get it.
Yeah.
But speaking of a P&L, if you know anything about finance, there's a lot of talk about uh, customer support uh, being or not being a cost center.
Mm.
The thing about customer support uh, being a cost center or not is, well, it's not really up to you. Um, Cost center is a finance term, and I think the issue with support being a cost center is that term gets thrown around in non-finance and accounting
Mm.
contexts,
Mm.
where the definition of that term is fluid. In accountancy, cost center is a very distinct thing. Um, but outside of accountancy, there's really there's not a hard and fast rule for what that term means. It just means like, oh, that sounds bad. That sounds like money being burnt.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
and so I don't necessarily have a problem with support being a quote unquote cost center, or like cost of doing sales, cost of doing business. I don't have a problem with that if we have a healthy outlook on it. But again, like support leaders need to understand what that is and what that means at an accountancy level so that they can have conversations about like, okay, well, in this framework then, like how is sales a cost center? How is marketing a cost center? How is engineering a cost center? Because if our definitional prescriptive for what is a cost center is just like, well, we spend more money on it than appears as a direct line to growth, then like, ladies and gentlemen, I give you engineering. Uh, so I think we have to get smarter about the ways that we're having that conversation. And I'm here for the debate about like, well, customer support isn't a cost center. I'm the guy who just sat here 20 minutes ago and said like, hey, make your support team do sales, or at least lead qualification.
Well,
But
yeah.
it dovetails into the same stuff. Like you need that knowledge, you need that business acumen, you need that understanding of how the pieces fit together for the company to make money so that you can make educated arguments for why support should get more funding and more headcount and special roles that you may need. Um, so
Yeah, I mean, I find myself Googling the definition of cost center here just to refresh my memory, up my
yeah,
business acumen a little bit here. Um, it says in finance, a cost center is a department or function within a company that incurs expenses but doesn't directly generate revenue, focusing on
right.
internal operations and supporting revenue generating activities. Um, but I think, beyond um, beyond definitions, I mean, it's good to understand definitions, obviously, and be
Yeah,
clear when you're using business terms or technical terms. So, like, you're not just bandying about like a buzzword you've heard, but like you know what it actually means.
Yeah.
Um, but I think there's a very human thing that happens, and we could have a whole podcast about language. We should probably wrap it up pretty soon. But
Oh yeah.
I think there's a one point here that I really have thought about a lot. Speaking and learning a second language, kind of contrasting
Mm,
languages, is how we as humans have created language from our thoughts, but also how language shapes our thoughts, right?
mm,
Like the medium affects the artist.
mm-hmm,
The artist doesn't only use the medium, right?
mm-hmm.
And so if you are taking notes with a pencil and paper, that's going to feel different for your thought process than taking notes with a keyboard and a screen, right? And so, and language is the same way. And so, if people hear the word cost center, then even if they know the definition, that's going to lead them down a certain thought process, just by
Mm-hmm.
nature of kind of association and the kinds of conversations that it comes up in, and the kind of that will lead people in a certain direction. And I think um, it's a subtle thing, and it's hard to always catch. But if you're aware of that idea that like the medium is affecting how you think, like this word, there's many terms where it has these kinds of impacts. But I think cost center is one of those ones where um, even if it's used innocently, so to speak, or
Mm-hmm.
with good intent, it leads people into a kind of a narrower scope of thinking, I think. And breaking out of that is, kind of the whole conversation of this
Yeah.
podcast. So I hope that
Yeah.
people can kind of escape the narrow confines, however they are created, and you
Yeah.
know, and have their impact be recognized.
That's right. That's right. And for what it's worth, I do prefer the term cost of doing business or cost of sale
Mm,
because that puts you in the same, technically speaking, like I said, like sales is a cost of sale. You pay sales staff so that you can make new
right,
sales. So
right.
it's a better grouping to be to be in than just cost center. But yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's all about um, a lot of what we're talking about, I think, comes down to storytelling.
right.
And anybody who's ever been to a writer's group or writing class or something like that should understand the concept that um, you go to those things to absorb more information and more ways of telling stories and innovative ways of writing narratives. And a lot of what we're talking about here is exactly that. Learning more about business, learning more about technology, learning more about your customers and how other people think of those things so that we can write better stories to tell those stories to people in better and clearer ways so that they can understand them and
Yep.
and interpret value the same way that we do.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's powerful. And you could totally shift the power dynamic. You come in with command of the vocabulary. You obviously bring data to support your story.
Mm,
You speaking the language of business or the technical terms. You are suddenly in a totally different power dynamic than it was before. And that's such a big unlock for people. So I hope more people will do that. And Colin, I think that's probably more than enough time today. But we just keep pulling on great threads, and I just didn't want to cut it
yeah,
off
yeah.
here. So yeah, thanks everybody for listening. This has been the CX Files podcast with Colin Flanigan. There'll be more details in the post or in the description about Colin and all the great things that he's doing. Colin, do you want to shout out any current employer, any initiatives, any websites or links or anything you want to tell people about?
Uh, Golly, I mean, come find me on LinkedIn. Most recently, I've decided that I'm just going to start doing ad hoc Zoom calls every now and again with folks who want to connect there. So come find me there. Other than that, if you're interested in any of what I've had to say, I do some consulting on the side. So if you're working on a strategy for your customers and how to best work with them and interact in the context of your business, come find me there too. I even do some stuff pro bono for products I think are just really interesting. Other than that, go check out Netwrix. It's a cybersecurity kind of a one-stop shop. We do a lot of stuff, and we've got great tools. And yeah, mostly though, just come say hi on LinkedIn. I love meeting new people and having these kinds of conversations. I think it's how I met you, Ben. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, come find me.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's Colin Flanigan for you, everybody. And Netrix is Netwrix. If you're
That's
listening,
right.
again, there'll be more links in the description and in the posts. But yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time on the CX Files.